Hello to all and welcome to my presentation, Spanish and American Expository Composition, a Contrastive Analysis of Rhetoric by Elizabeth Garcia. This is the agenda I will be following for this presentation. In the fall of 2014, I was fortunate enough to obtain a professor position with a community college in Southeast Houston, Texas, for the English for Speakers of Other Languages ESOL program under the Department of College Preparatory. This program is designed for international, residential, and non-residential students who want to improve their English. We focus on courses in advanced and intermediate level oral communication, grammar, and reading and writing. Our classrooms are diverse in age range and educational backgrounds. The age range is anywhere from 18 to 60 plus years old. And the educational background is comprised of students who come to us straight out of high school and other students who have obtained a bachelor's, master's, or doctoral degrees from their home countries. This photo that you see is a photo of my actual students in one of my courses this semester. And as you can see, the 4 students in the far left-hand side are from Mexico, which is what this presentation is going to be focusing on Mexican writing. The research question that I'm going to be focusing on is, do Spanish students write how they think compared to English students? And the why. Why did I choose this topic in this research question? I wanted to investigate if Spanish students write how they think by comparing them to English students. I see how this population of English language learners' first language influences their pronunciation, but does it also influence their writing? In our program, we teach the deductive linear development pattern that includes a topic sentence, thesis statement, supporting details, transitions, and conclusion. But I've noticed that the writing that I get back from my students is not always what was requested in the assignment. I want to be able to gain the knowledge to be able to understand the why of their errors and how to fix them. With this research, I also hope to reach some level of understanding of the errors that I see in their writing. For one example, I see that one entire paragraph is written as one whole sentence, and they use excessive use of commas. I also hope that my research findings and experiences will provide understanding to anyone with no previous Spanish background who is teaching native Spanish speakers writing in English. Contrastive rhetoric. I want to go ahead and focus on that a little bit. Kaplan, in a 1966 research study about cultural thought processes, explains how language is a reflection of the way people think. And so I find that the study of Kaplan's work helps me to understand more about cultural thought patterns. Robert E. Kaplan in 1966 wrote an article named Cultural Thought Patterns in Intercultural Education. And his reasoning is that each language of the world is influenced by a thought pattern that's unique to the culture or the collective customs and beliefs of the people. So this thought pattern is visible in the way that the sentences in a paragraph are ordered and structured. Each language has a distinctive way in which sentences in a paragraph are written. That is, it's reflective of the thought pattern. He also introduces us to discourse patterns, and he does it with several languages, but I want to focus on the English and the Spanish. All right, so English can be indicated by a straight line, and the communication is direct and linear. It doesn't go off topic, and it stays close to the main subject or topic of interest. And so, as we can see here, it's got clear thesis statements, clear topic sentences, transitions, and it also has other cohesive devices to guide the reader from one idea to the next. Now, compared to the Spanish pattern, this can be indicated as a zigzag line, but with the lines not being parallel to each other. Communication in this language is oftentimes digresses or moves away from the main point. A lot of romantic. I always feel that the Spanish language is very romantic, and so they add a lot to it. Yes, so in addition, extra ideas are introduced to add to the richness of the central idea. And so the development is by digression, which takes a lot of time because they digress a lot. I'm sorry. It's very flowery. It's very fancy, formal, intensifiers, reiteration, repetitive, and English speakers want them to get to the point quickly. So it's longer in Spanish. And my next source is Maria Montano-Harmon's study, and it's called Discourse Features of Written Mexican Spanish, Current Research and Contrastive Rhetoric and Its Implications. And she studied and analyzed discourse features of compositions written in Spanish by 9th grade high schools students in Mexico. And she compared them to those written in English by Anglo-American students in the United States. She came up with a summary of some of the discourse features between both of them. She compared both, and she found that the Spanish writers, their discourse features in Spanish were significantly different from those in English. For the Spanish writers, fewer sentences in number with longer sentences. She also found that the paragraphs consisted of only one sentence, which is what I see in my students' writing. So this was very in line with what I see in my classes. Run-on sentence. I see a lot of those in my students' papers, a lot of run-on sentences. Relied heavily on synonyms for repetition, use formal words and elaborate phrases. They relied on additive and explicative relationships between ideas and a lot of digression. And it's they do point it out in their paper, in their writing, and they say that they've digressed. And then we're comparing them to the English writers. And the English writers, they relied heavily on enumeration. They had shorter sentences compared to the Spanish writers. They had simple vocabulary, simple sentences, very different from the Spanish writers. They had few synonyms, no flowery language, nothing compared to the Spanish writers. The Spanish writers use a lot of flowery language. The English writers had logical relationship between ideas, and they used connectors. They had few digressions compared to the Spanish writers who had a lot of digressions. So I found this summary of the discourse features in line with what I see with my Spanish writers. Some of the implications that she mentions in her research, based on the differences that there are in the discourse features between the Mexican and the Spanish and Mexican, Spanish, and English, the main implication is in the evaluation of written compositions. Spanish compositions were marked down if they did not follow a linear deductive development in American English. Also, a carryover of a discourse pattern from one language to another may be a factor in the inability of some students to comprehend text or to write acceptable expository essay in standard English or in standard Spanish. So teachers must have awareness of differences in discourse features. Language teachers must also teach students the discourse features of the target language so that the students' interaction in the target language with native speakers of that language will not be limited in any way in either the oral or the written form. And so we're also going to see this being played out in another research that I studied, where we can see the connection there as well. Now, the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. This hypothesis refers to the proposal that the particular language one speaks influences the way one thinks about the reality. And this is by Chandler, 1994. Linguistic determinism. It talks about two of them. One is the strong hypothesis and the other one was the weak hypothesis. So the linguistic determinism is a strong hypothesis, and it says that language determines thought and that linguistic categories limit and determine cognitive theories. And this hypothesis doesn't have a whole lot of backup. Now, the linguistic relativity does, and it's considered the weak hypothesis, but it's got more support. And the relationship between, it says that the relationship between the language and thought, and so there is a relationship in that. It also has a lot of, received a lot of attention. Now, I wanted to focus, when it came to the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, I wanted to focus more on the applications in teaching. How can we apply it, or how can we help our students with it? And it says that that awareness on the language, there needs to be, again, an awareness on the language, which is something that we brought up with Montona-Harmon. That awareness on the language can foster linguistic and intercultural awareness for both learners and teachers. The applied linguistics also supports the weak version, like I said at the start, of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, and present the relationship between language, thought, and culture as beneficial in the learning of language. And also it says that awareness of differences in language and perception could be the first step towards addressing the need of including teaching of intercultural competence and curriculum in class planning. And so that goes back to letting them use their dialect, right? What we learned in class also, their language, for us to let them use their language in class. So it is necessary to include culture in language learning as a way of getting meaning by perceiving the world through the metaphors, idioms, and grammatical patterns of the other language by knowing others and, more importantly, ourselves. It is also important for teachers to bring back the native language to the classroom, since learners' mother tongue is part of their identity and a tool to understand conceptual similarities and differences among languages. That sounds familiar to all of us, correct? Because that is something that we learned in class. So we always ask, well, but how is it going to look in our classrooms? Okay, next slide. And this is the conclusion of my presentation. I find that the purpose of this presentation was to provide insight that will be helpful to those with little Spanish background who are teaching Spanish-speaking, particular Mexican students, or writers who are writing in English as their second language. The common theme is that awareness on the language can foster linguistic and intellectual awareness for both learners and teachers. Also, based on the research, I found that there is a difference in how both groups think and write. And teachers and students must have awareness of differences in discourse features, and that language teachers must teach students the discourse features of the target language so that the students' interaction in the target language with native speakers of that language will not be limited in any way in either oral or written form. So I plan to take this and research it a little bit more, and that way I can have a better understanding of my students in class. Thank you for listening to my presentation.